Hello again. Major concerns about a potential conflict on the Korean Peninsula continue. What happens if the Democratic People's Republic of Korea conducts another missile or nuclear test? Will the United States respond? There is, of course, precedent for American military action, the DPRK, going all the way back to the early 1950s and the Korean War. That confrontation also involved China and Russia. Later in the show, we will discuss how the origins and outcome of that conflict are still resonating today. But first, for the latest on the tensions, we begin with correspondent Hahm, who joins us from South Korea's capital, Seoul. Thanks so much for joining us. What's the very latest on the tensions? If another DPRK missile test or nuclear test happens, what sort of preparedness are we seeing in the south? And bring us up to date on the controversial deployment of the THAAD ballistic missile defense system too, if you would, Shane.
Sure, Nathan. Well, as far as South Korean forces are concerned here, they've maintained this heightened state of alert for some time now to watch out for any missile or nuclear tests. The country's acting president has ordered the military to keep a high level of readiness for any signs of possible provocations. But keep in mind that South Korean forces are in the midst of conducting joint military drills with U.S. forces Korea, and that's been taking place since late March, and they're scheduled to continue through the end of this month. Now, these drills, of course, have taken place for decades now and are often the target of criticism from the DPRK. And speaking of these drills, you also have the USS Carl Vinson Strike Group reportedly expected to arrive sometime this week. And we also know that, as you mentioned, the U.S. and South Korean forces are pushing through with their deployment of this THAAD anti-missile defense system, much to the dismay of neighboring countries like China. So all this, these shows of forces, they're all high-profile examples here that the allies want to show. Whether it works as a deterrent or not is another issue, but so far we haven't seen any signs of any sort of missile test or nuclear test, despite what many experts are anticipating that it could happen, is imminent, that they're saying.
Yeah, Shane, as you were talking, we're just playing some video there of demonstrations as the THAAD missile system is installed there. Tensions in Seoul and the rest of the Republic of Korea seem high. Are people worried? Is there an expectation that all of this can still be resolved peacefully? And there are tensions with their U.S. ally, right?
Right. Peaceful resolution is always the hope. Any outright military conflict would be disastrous here. Keep in mind, there's nearly 30,000 U.S. troops stationed in the ROK alone, and tens of thousands in Japan as well. They'd all be in harm's way if any sort of military engagement were to occur. But for ordinary South Koreans, the majority have lived with a divided Korean Peninsula their entire lives. It's been 6.5 decades since the end of the Korean War. Where I'm sitting in Seoul is about an hour's drive to the DMZ, which happens to be the most heavily armed border in the world. But if you walk the city streets, you'd never imagine that thousands of troops across the border are so close here, and people go about their daily lives. There's no evidence of people going out and hoarding basic necessities right now. If anything, the upcoming presidential election here and the recent political scandal and impeachment involving, of course, former President Park Geun-hye have been more on people's minds. But obviously, national security is always a major topic, especially with this presidential campaign going on. So it'll be interesting to see how it affects the outcome of the election with voters here headed to the polls on May 9th.
Shane, thanks. And it's worth remembering that one of the leaders in that election expected to, it does have reservations about the THAAD deployment as well. Thanks so much.